before we start our first question, which is from Nana and Lovu, there was another, a couple of things that have come up that learners have just asked. They've sent in questions that they've written out or they've typed up, and they are basic questions. And these are the basics of the whole plants and the way plants respond to environment. First thing is that plant hormones are like our hormones. They are chemical messengers. And what they do is they aid the plant in its metabolism, in its growth and development. That's what they do. So plant hormones work for plants like our hormones work for us because they are chemical messengers. Okay, then that was what plants are. Then I want you to look at what a tropism is. Okay, so what is a tropism? And the easiest thing to tell you is that that word tropism means to turn. Okay, it literally means to turn. So what is turning? The plant is turning. So it is the growth movement and turning movement of plants, okay, in response to an environmental stimulus. Okay, you could also say it is the growing or turning movement of a plant in response to an external stimulus. Remember, internal is very different to external. These will all be external stimuli. So that's your tropism. It's a growth movement or a turning movement of the plants in response to an environmental stimulus. Now, that stimulus, if it is light, then it's called phototropism. So the plant is going to responds to a light stimulus. Okay? And if it's gravity, all right, that would be geotropism. Okay, and that means it responds to the stimulus of gravity. Okay, that's geotropism, phototropism. Now think, stems are going to be positively phototrophic. Okay, and roots are going to be negatively phototrophic. And then when we look at gravity, stems are going to be negatively geotrophic, and roots are positively geotrophic. Why? Because stems grow away from gravity and roots grow towards gravity. And when a light stimulus comes at all around the plant, for example, when it is a normal day, the sun comes up and it goes down. So the plant gets light from all sides. It's going to merely grow straight up. And when the plant grows straight up, so if I've got my little plant here, here's the soil, and I've got my leaves and my little plant. There's my little plant, and my plant normally will go straight up. Why? Because it's getting a light stimulus from all sides. Okay, so that is not going to be phototropism because the plant is not turning. Okay, there's no turning movement or growth movement towards the light, so responding to the light. Okay, so the fact that the plant grows upwards would mean that it is negatively geotrophic, okay, and the roots grow down that means that they are going to be positively geotrophic. Okay, that's what makes this plant grow up. When the light comes from only one side, so I've got my plant, there's my little plant, but the light only comes from one side. We call that one side is uni. Uni means one. Lateral means side. So when it comes from one side, the plant will grow in that direction, and that will mean that it is positively phototrophic. Okay, because it is turning or responding to the light from one side. Uni, one, lateral, coming from the side. Okay, those are the basics. Also, something else you must remember is that an auxin is a plant hormone, and so is a gibberellin, where an auxin is going to cause the cells to grow, develop, and elongate and differentiate, all right? It also, and this is what gets confusing for a lot of learners, auxins stimulate growth in stems, but they will inhibit growth in roots. And you must remember this, because when you have to do the way the plant moves towards a unilateral light stimulus, the auxins are going to move away from light because they're destroyed by light, and they'll move to the darker side, and they cause cell elongation, and that's why the plant grows to the side. Whereas in roots, they move away, they move towards gravity, and they inhibit growth here. So the other cells grow normally on the top side, and that causes the root to grow down. Okay, so if you remember this, that auxins stimulate growth in stems, but they inhibit growth in roots. That's why the stem will turn towards the light, and the roots will turn towards gravity. Okay, let's look at our first question. All right, this is our question from Nana Ndlovu, and thank you for sending this in, hun. So, Nana, an investigation was carried out. Let's just get a color here. So it's an investigation, remember? So it was carried out to determine the effect of auxins on the growth of the coleoptiles. Now, just doing our basics, it was an investigation, and this will tell you what your, if this was graft, okay, it will tell you what your dependent variable and your independent variable is, because it would be the effect of auxins, all right, that would be your independent variable, because your investigators are going to decide how the auxins affect the growth, and your result is going to be in your growth, so that's going to be your dependent variable. Remember our little word dromy, so D-R-O-M-Y. Your dependent or respondent variable that can be observed or measured, and it's always plotted on the y-axis. Okay, now we have three coleoptiles. We've got A, B, and C. So let's have a look. And they show us and they tell us. Okay, so for A, they've cut this little pit off. And by doing that, they've removed the apical bud. And the apical bud is the growing tip of the stem. Okay, so plants will grow upwards. Why? Because they want to expose all the leaves to the sunlight evenly. Okay, so plants have what we call apical dominance. They will grow upwards. And the lateral branches are sort of like a second thought. But all the time that plant is growing up, there is apical dominance, which means it dominates to grow upwards. Okay, when we cut that off the tip, off this little coleoptile, which is just the shoot, when we cut it off, we cut off the auxins. which means now that plant is not going to continue growing upwards because there's nothing to make the cells grow. Okay, by cutting that off, it means that we can now have the lateral buds, and they will now, your lateral branches will now start to grow. And that's how we can maintain a hedge. When you look at people and they've got hedges dividing the properties, if they trim the top of the hedge, it grows very bushy on the sides. And if they trim the front and the back of that, it makes a solid wall. Why? Because it no longer has apical dominance. Apical dominance to grow up with the apical bud, which is at the tip of the stem. Okay, we've cut that off now. It's gone. We've removed the apical bud, so that's it. Then, now, so in other words, here we'll have branches coming out from the side, and we will then have the lateral buds developing. Here, this one, they've covered with plastic, and if it's covered, it can't receive light. Okay, it can't receive light. So how is that going to ensure that the plant grows upwards? Okay, they may as well have cut the tip off. It's about the same effect. And then this little one, C, is covered with a transparent plastic cover. So therefore, it receives light. But look at this. What's this say? It is uni. Uni means one. And lateral, as I told you just now, means light from the side. So it's receiving unilateral sunlight, which means what's going to happen? This little guy is going to carry on straight up. Is going to carry on, and it's going to get nice and fat on the sides here. This little guy, well, it's going to have pretty much the same response as this one, and it's going to just keep carry on going up. And here, what's going to happen? It's going to turn. And if it turns, it means it is a tropism. Okay, and because it's moving to light, it's going to be phototropism. So it says, explain the results obtained shown by B and C. Now, if we look at B, okay, we go back here. What's going to happen with B? The shoot grows straight. Okay, it's going to grow straight. Okay, because tip does not receive any light. So it doesn't even know that the light's coming from the side. It doesn't. Okay, so, and where are the auxins? The auxins remain at the tip. Okay, so the auxins are going to be at the tip, so therefore all parts of plant are stimulated equally. Okay, they're all stimulated equally. That little growth tip here is covered. So here, this thing's just going to keep growing nicely upwards. Okay, now when we look at C, this little plastic tip is allowing the light to come from only one side. So I'm going to just give us some space here. And what you're going to say is the following. Okay, for tip C, this is what's going to happen. Okay, plant responds to the unilateral, remember unilateral from one side, light stimulus. Okay, the auxins move to the shaded side. Okay, and at the shaded side, they cause the cells to elongate. Okay, and something, I'm just going to put this in or a little square bracket here, is auxins are destroyed by light. That's why they will move away from the light. They move to the shaded side. Okay, so if this was the tip, okay, the tip does this. All right, why? Because the auxins are all going to gather here on the shaded side. Wait, let me redo this. Okay, we've got our little, let's do it this way. There's our little stem growing up. And now we have a unilateral light source coming from this side, which means that the auxins don't want to be here. They move to this side. So we now have a higher concentration here on the dark side. Okay, on the dark side. And this is not Star Wars, all right? It's not Star Wars. It's the dark side because it's the side that's not receiving the light. Okay, so I'm going to put your shaded side, and this is the light side. Okay, so they concentrate on the dark side, so they've moved to the shaded side. So therefore, we have a higher concentration of auxins on shaded side. And it sounds like I'm repeating, but remember, when you write an answer in an exam, imagine that you are writing an answer that someone that you like very much and who is very intelligent but has no clue what you're talking about is going to read it. And if that is the case, then you will always get all your marks. Don't assume that the person marking your paper knows what you're trying to say. They don't. But they're intelligent, okay? But think of them, you know, when you write something for somebody you like, you'll always write it in a nice way for them to understand. And that's what you're doing here. Okay, so therefore your higher concentration is going to be on the shaded side, and therefore auxins will cause, look at this, cause the cells to elongate. And therefore the stem will, watch, bend towards the light, what? The light stimulus. Okay, and that, folks, is your answer. So what it's going to do is, as those auxins don't want the light, they move away from the light. And in the stem, they stimulate cell elongation. So look here, these cells are going to stay where they are, but these cells are going to get longer. And what happens? The tip tips over. It grows towards the light source. All right, let's have a look at our next question. And it says, explain why lateral branches are likely to develop on coleoptile A. On coleoptile A, we've cut off the auxins. They're no longer there. So your answer would be, since the apical, and what's the apical bud, guys and girls? The apical bud is the bud that's right at the tip of the stem. That's your apical bud. Remember, your growth tips are your stem tip and your root tip. Okay, so since the apical bud has been cut, or has been removed, there are no auxins in the tip. Okay, therefore, apical dominance. Now remember, apical dominance means to grow upwards. Okay, so apical dominance will not take place. Or you can say apical dominance is inhibited. And when the apical dominance is inhibited, the side branches are going to grow nicely. That's why when you trim the top of a tree, it gets nice and bushy. Okay, let's just go back to our questions. And it says, when a plant falls over and it lies horizontally, the roots start to grow downwards. Okay, now we know that is geotropism. Describe the role of auxins in geotropism for the above example. Please remember that auxins will inhibit growth in roots. But when we look at stems, auxins stimulate growth and cell elongation. Okay, so stimulate in plants, inhibit in roots. So let's do this question and then we'll go for an ad break. Okay, so we've got our little pot, our plant. Here's our little plant. And our plant has fallen over, so our little plant is lying like this. Okay, and it's now going to grow up, and the roots are going to grow down. And they want us to explain this aspect. So we're going to say auxins gather. Now another word for gather is accumulate, but accumulate is a difficult word. Accumulate. But you can also just say gather. All right. They accumulate or gather on the lower side of the root. Okay, so what's happening here? We've got our little root. Here's our little root. And now it's sitting like that. But here is gravity. And we know that roots, and that's the root tip sitting here, that root tip is going to grow down. So it's going to go beady, 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 beady down like that. Okay, what makes it turn down is the following. The auxins gather here. So let's do it in green. The auxins gather here on the lower side. And what do? They inhibit growth. Okay, they inhibit growth, which means that these cells don't grow. But the fact that the auxins have all moved away here, and they've moved down, means that here there are no auxins. And therefore, it grows normally. Okay, and that's how it works. So, we go back here. Our auxins gather on the lower side of the root. Okay, and when they gather on the lower side of the root, we now have a high concentration of auxins on the lower side. This is exactly what I showed you here. On the lower side, and little or no auxins on the upper side. Okay, so they're not here anymore, they're down here. All right, and what happens? Auxins inhibit. So in stems they stimulate, in roots they inhibit growth. Therefore, the upper side cells grow grow, and the root tip grows downwards. and therefore the root is positively remember geo is the stimulus, a response to gravity, geotropic. Okay, so let's just recap. A normal plant grows upwards. Why? Because of apical dominance. So that root tip, that stem tip grows up. The apical bud, which is the top bud, dominates the growth. And the side branches will be small. Okay? When we remove that apical bud, there is no longer apical dominance. So the lateral branches will now start to grow, and that's what causes a plant to be nice and bushy. Okay. In plants, in stems, your auxins will stimulate cell growth and elongation. In roots, auxins will inhibit cell growth and elongation. So when these cells here are inhibited because there's lots of auxins, what happens at the top? That just grows normally, and that will cause it to grow down.